Hello everyone and welcome to today's episode of Scandalous History. In a country full of remarkable royal mistresses, Diane de Poitiers still stands out. She is best known as the mistress of French King Henry II, a relationship that lasted for 25 years and most of Henry's life. Now, this raised eyebrows for two reasons. Firstly, there was an enormous age difference between the two, with Diane playing the unusual role of cougar. There was also a bitter rivalry between Diane and Henry's queen, the equally formidable Catherine de Medici. Diane was born into a noble family in southern France in 1499. She received a good education and married well, albeit at the age of 15, and to a man who was 39 years older. Her husband, Louis de Brezé, was a trusted advisor of then-King Francis I, so Diane was invited to join the royal court as lady-in-waiting. So far, so standard. However, after 16 years together, Louis died, and the next phase of Diane's life began, where she rose to become one of the most powerful people at the French court. She had been savvy enough to hang on to her late husband's title and revenues rather than returning them to the king, as she was supposed to do. She was even ballsy enough to challenge Francis's claim in a court of law. However, rather than being angry, Francis was apparently so impressed with Diane that he allowed her to manage the estates without the supervision of a male guardian. This gave Diane a degree of freedom unheard of for most women at that time, especially as there was no pressure to remarry just for financial security. With all her poise, wealth and beauty, it's safe to say that most men at court would have regarded Diane as a bit of a catch. But to a socially awkward and much younger man, she must have seemed like the sun. Henry II wasn't exactly known for his sparkling personality, especially when compared to his father, Francis I, who was sexy, charismatic, and a legendary womanizer. In 1526, when he was just 7 years old, Henry and his brother were sent to Spain in a hostage exchange for their father, who had been captured in battle by the Holy Roman Emperor. As Francis refused to pay the ransom and really didn't seem to give much of a fuck about his sons, they were kept prisoner for 4 years. As an aside here, because it's sort of quite indicative of Francis's character, when he set foot on French shores after being released, he is reported to have yelled, "Now I am king! I am king once again!" and then immediately jumped on a horse and rode off at high speed, all while his two young sons watched from the boat that would take them to the Spanish ship. So that gives you some indication of what his parenting skills were like. It's unsurprising then that when Henry finally returned to France, he was pretty miserable. The Venetian ambassador in France wrote that few people at the court could ever remember to have heard him laugh from the heart. There was one person who seemed to make Henry smile though. That was Diane. In 1531, when Henry was just 11 or 12, he wore her colours at a jousting tournament. Now, considering the tournament was held in honour of his new stepmother, it was a pretty bold move to wear the colours of another woman. When Henry was 15, Diane officially became his mistress. So yeah, it was pretty gross by today's standards. The age difference almost certainly affected the dynamic of the relationship, which set tongues wagging. Diane was Henry's mentor and confidant, and he seemed happy to defer to her in almost every way, despite his sovereign status. By letting a woman be the boss of him, Henry only highlighted the more negative aspects of his character. He was weak, he didn't have much of a personality, and he was rubbish at ruling. But the fact that Diane wasn't his wife made it worse. The Spanish ambassador reported that Henry continues to yield more and more to the yoke of Diane, and has become her subject and slave entirely. The situation was further complicated by the fact that Henry had married Catherine de Medici in 1533, and to misquote Princess Diana, there were 3 people in that marriage. Henry and Diane lived like husband and wife, while Catherine simply had to put up with it. She was allegedly so desperate for Henry's affection that she would even spy on the couple having sex so that she could learn how to pleasure him. However, Diane ensured that Henry didn't completely duck out of his conjugal responsibilities. When he and Catherine remained childless after years of marriage, Diane not only convinced Henry to have regular sex with his wife, she sought fertility advice from apothecaries, astrologers, and sorcerers on their behalf. For 25 years, Diane was queen in all but name. Henry gave her the crown jewels and the Château de Chenonceau, a royal property that Catherine had allegedly wanted for herself. Diane was also granted 2 titles, Duchess of Valentinois in 1548 and Duchesse d'Étampes in 1553. And centuries before the likes of Bennifer and Kimier, Henry would sign his official correspondence with one combined name, Henry Diane. As long as Henry lived, there was nothing Catherine could do. However, in 1559, fate gruesomely intervened. While taking part in a jousting tournament, Henry was injured when his lance splintered and a piece of the wood flew up into his eye. The wound became infected because, for some reason, the royal doctors decided to take a wait-and-see approach to treatment, so Henry died of sepsis a couple of weeks later, and it makes me cringe every time I think of it. Catherine knew her time had finally come, and she didn't hang around. She immediately banned Diane from Henry's deathbed, despite Henry repeatedly asking for her, before forcing Diane to hand over the crown jewels and the Château de Chenonceau. Diane was then promptly kicked out of court and exiled to the countryside, where she remained for the rest of her life. Diane's political savvy extended beyond simply shagging the king. She was a Renaissance version of an influencer, using fashion, beauty, and the media to manipulate public perception of her. Her widowed status kick-started her lifelong habit of dressing entirely in black and white. These were the official colours of mourning, but Diane's decision to make them a permanent fixture suggests she knew they made her look hot. They also symbolised the moon, emblem of her muse, the Roman goddess Diana. It's entirely possible that Diane adopted this signature look to help make sure she never went unnoticed at court, not just because she liked the colours. Establishing herself as a recognisable brand was all part of Diane's carefully contrived aesthetic. She was a patron of the arts and utilised Renaissance trends in art and literature to promote an idealised image of herself as beautiful yet respectable. This painting of her by a member of the Fontainebleau school is a great example of this. By posing nude as her inspiration and namesake, the Roman goddess of the hunt, Diane was implying they shared similar traits: chastity, virtue, and a carefully controlled sexual power over men. Oh, and she was 51 years old when this was painted. I already know I'm not going to look anywhere near this good when I'm 51. Diane was also famously vain and took great care over her appearance. Her beauty regime included exercising regularly, which was unusual for a woman at the French court, bathing in cold water up to 3 times a day, and even wearing a mask to protect her fair skin from the sun, so she was years ahead of everybody there. Her most extreme beauty ritual, however, involved drinking liquid gold, which was gold chloride mixed with diethyl ether. The historian Pierre de Brantôme described her as beautiful of face, especially as she had a very large whiteness without any makeup. It's thought that this large whiteness, however, was actually due to anemia caused by heavy metal poisoning. This was given further credibility by analysis of Diane's hair, which had been preserved when her grave was desecrated during the French Revolution. A high concentration of gold was found, and her hair was thinner than average, another sign of gold intoxication. Diane never remarried following Henry's death, and her political power eventually waned. She died in exile at the age of 66, possibly of complications after a fall from a horse, but also possibly from all the gold that was meant to preserve her youth and beauty.